So in this hands-on activity for this section, we're going to simulate performing ETL, extract, transform, and load, just using Microsoft Excel and Power Query. So again, we probably don't have access to a real data warehouse here that I can share with you for free, but using Excel and Power Query, we can still show the same concepts. And again, it's those concepts that are important on the exam. So let's go back to our movie ratings example here using that GroupLens database. So as you recall, we went to grouplens.org and downloaded the MovieLens ML100K dataset in the previous section. If you are doing this activity out of sequence, you can go and download that here from grouplens.org/datasets/MovieLens and find the MovieLens 100K dataset. To recap, we went in and renamed the u.item file to movies.csv as part of the previous activity, and that's going to be the file that we try to import here in this activity. Let's just remind ourselves what this data looks like. So the raw data, if I right-click on this file and view it in my favorite text editor, you can see what we have here are pipe-delimited fields, where we have a movie identifier, a unique ID, followed by the movie title. That movie title actually includes the release date. So they're doing that to disambiguate movies that share the same name, but were released in different years. So part of our activity here is going to be extracting that information. So I just care about the title itself. The title of this movie for me is Toy Story. It's not Toy Story 1995. Now that release year might be a valuable thing to have around, but really I want that in two separate columns, not in the same title field. We then have the release date, which is in a somewhat unusual date format of date, month, name, year. We then have an empty video release date column there that we're not going to use at all, a link to IMDb, and finally a list of all the genres that it might belong to. So we know from the description what each one of these fields corresponds to. It might be adventure or children's or action or horror or whatever it might be. And a 0 indicates that it does not belong to that genre. A 1 indicates that it does belong to that genre. All right, so let's go back to Excel here. Again, I've opened up a new worksheet. And to import this data using sort of an ETL process, I'm going to use Power Query. So let's go to the Data tab here. I'm going to say Get Data from File, from Text CSV. Let's select that movies.csv file, wherever you may have put it. And here we have the UI for importing this data. Okay, so we've already extracted the data. We can see it here being pulled out of that pipe delimited file that we just imported. Interestingly, it automatically figured out that it was pipe delimited. So already Power Query is a lot more sophisticated than Access is. As you recall, when we tried to load this data into Microsoft Access in the previous section, it was a bit of a mess. It couldn't make sense of the dates. It couldn't make sense of the delimiters. There were all sorts of problems, but Power Query is a more sophisticated tool and it's doing a much better job. All right, so we can see here that we have the columns. They are unnamed because there is no header row in the source data. We have to know what they are and name them accordingly. So we've done the E in ETL. Next, we need to do the T, transform it. And here's this handy dandy transform data button. Let's click on that, see what happens. And here we have this big view. Let me shrink this into the screen here so we can actually see it. This is the Power Query editor for transforming our data. And you can see Power Query is actually letting us examine some of the attributes of this data too, and giving us little histograms. We're not going to talk about that just yet. What we do want to do, however, is change these column names to something readable. So let's change that first one to Movie ID. The second one to Movie Name, or Movie Title perhaps. The release date, which we can see it actually did successfully convert into a date format. That's cool. This column is the video release date, and I'm just going to remove it because there's nothing in it. Then we have the IMDb link. And finally, each individual genre. And if you do want to fill these out, you can. If you go back to the original data set and refer to the README file, you'll see the cheat sheet of what each genre is. You can see it's action, adventure, animation, children's, so on and so forth. Now, if you want to take the time to do that, you can. However, I am lazy. I am going to delete all of these columns instead. Because watching me do that for a half an hour is not going to be enthralling content. All right, there we go. Now you can see it's keeping track of all the transformation steps that have been applied here so far. So you can see that it already applied all the various data type transformations automatically. We went from that weird date format to something that's actually a date format. We can see that we renamed some of the columns and we removed a bunch of columns as well. So to make life a little bit more interesting, let's actually split out this movie title field into the actual title and the release year, like we kind of wanted to. Again, I'm not going to refer to the movie Get Shorty as Get Shorty 1995. I just wanted to say Get Shorty. So we can do that as part of the transformation step as well. Let's go ahead and select that movie title column. I'm going to right click on it and say split column by delimiter. The idea here is that I know that if there's a open parenthesis, that's going to be the beginning of the year. And I am assuming that there aren't any parentheses in the movie title itself. Let's sort of ignore that problem for now. So by delimiter, and actually it figured that out already on its own that I want to do that by the parenthesis. Power Query can be kind of magical sometimes. I do want to split that on the, let's say the rightmost delimiter. That's going to be a more robust way of handling this, right? So if I did in fact have a parenthesis inside the movie title, in fact, that is the case here, right here for 7, right? We have 7 parentheses, alternate spelling of 7. This will make sure that I'm using the rightmost instance of that parenthesis. So I know that the rightmost left parenthesis will always be the one enclosing the year. So, hey, that's cool. Let's go ahead and hit OK. See what happens. Cool. So now we have movie title 1 and movie title 2 that have been created. And we can see a couple more transformation steps have been added here to split the column by a delimiter and change the type of the resulting column. All right, so we're almost done here. Cool, it looks like that actually worked, right? So we can see that 7 with the 7 in parentheses got retained there, and I only have that date remaining there in the second field. First, let's change this movie title to just title. And I'm going to make this other column a year, or a release year. Now, the problem that we still have is that we still have that trailing parenthesis, so let's get rid of that. I'm going to right-click on that column, and again, say split column, this time by number of characters. So I know the first 4 characters are going to be the actual year. I'm going to type in 4. Once as far left as possible. Okay. So now I've extracted those year names, and it looks like it's automatically converted that to a integer format, so that's cool. But I'm left with this extra column here of closed parentheses, so that's not terribly interesting. Let's just delete that column, right-click, remove, and rename this back to release year. There we go. Release year. Cool. All right, I'm liking this, so let's see what's going on here. Cool feature here. If I click on that release year column, it gives me this value distribution where I can see the distribution of release years in this little preview of the data at least. So looks like 1996 was the most popular year. Not surprising given that this data set goes back to the late 90s. And yeah, it's looking good. So I think this is the format we want. So again, we already extracted the data. We have now transformed the data to both rename these columns and apply the correct data types and get rid of the columns we don't need. And furthermore, split out that movie title from the release year. So that's our transform, the T in ETL, right? So very cool. We've extracted the data. We've transformed the data. Next, we need to load the data. So to do that, we're just going to hit close and load to say, yeah, I'm happy with this. Go ahead and load it. And there we have it loaded into Excel. Now, Power Query is also a feature in Power BI, so that's actually a tool you might really use as a data analyst, even if it's not Excel. So yeah, getting a little bit more real here. And it looks like it was all successful. So we have our handy dandy movie ID column, title, release year, it all looks good, release date, formatted as an actual date string, and the link to IMDb. So cool. Let's just scroll down and convince ourselves that there aren't any weird problems here. Just doing a quick scan for any missing or data that looks obviously invalid. All looks good. So yeah, it looks like we successfully extracted, transformed, and loaded the MovieLens movie data from our movies.csv file. Very cool. That's ETL in action, guys. Congratulations, and let's move on to our next section.